Hello and welcome to our Tag One team talk on Laravel, from the evolution of monolithic applications to the revolution of fully decoupled systems. I'm Michael Meyers, the managing director at Tag One Consulting, and I'm joined today by Laslo Horvath, our senior software engineer. We're doing this talk in 3 segments. The first segment was an overview of Laravel. It was really awesome. Check it out. This segment, part 2, is the evolution of development from monolithic apps to decoupled systems. And be sure to check out part 3, which is the future of application development in Laravel. Laslo, welcome back. We mentioned some of these concepts in the overview. At a high level, can you just, before we dig into each and some of the pros and cons, can you just give people, the difference? What is the monolithic approach? What is the, fully decoupled approach?
Yeah, so I won't go into a huge history or whatever here. So the basic difference is, in the monolithic way, you have everything in one place. So your code is basically generating the output and generating the output that's shown in the browser. So you have this cycle, and this stateless cycle, so to speak, where you just submit something, the server calculates it, spits it out, and then you get it in your browser. The decoupled way is where you have, on one side you have the front-end application, and on the other side you have the back-end application, and they communicate only through API endpoints. So you could be able to, it rarely happens. This is really rarely the case. I'm yet to see it, like really see it, where you could basically just switch out the front end with something else and you get it. And also on the other side, you can switch out the back end to something else. As long as the API signature is the same, you basically, it's seamless. So this is like the whole thing. And the fully decoupled way, actually the front-end applications are meant to mimic like how normal applications work on your phone, laptop, tablet, whatever. So all across all devices, it should in theory work like a normal app, which means it's stateful. So you can just click around quickly, and the whole experience should be undisrupted. So it feels like it's flown.
So what are some of the challenges or problems with the monolithic approach to application development?
Yeah, so for me, the biggest thing was that it was such a huge waste of resources. So basically you go through this whole cycle. You want to change one checkbox, for example, and do a save. It will like send a bunch of things, then the server will be running, and then it will return the response. So this whole cycle like felt cumbersome, like especially if you know how it can work, and especially if you're like used to using like, let's call them desktop apps or native apps, maybe it's a better name, and then you jump into this, and then you have to click and save and then wait for the response, and then there's nothing on the page, then something comes, and it's just somehow it feels very inefficient. It increases the traffic every time you send, you get it back. It's kind of, it's also feels old school. We as people always like new things. Sometimes we're afraid, but we like trying it out. And if that's something new and shiny, you get drawn to it. And this just felt like such a huge waste of resources and feels like really, really old school. Also, the second biggest thing for me was that it's really disruptive, because I click and then I have to wait, and I cannot do anything else because, and if the internet is slow, and if there's something on the server, queries are slow, I cannot do anything else. I have to wait for the response to come back. And, if you're doing a payment or you're doing something, like every time I need to do a payment that's not marginal, I'm like, okay, what if something goes wrong? I know how banking systems work and everything. I know it's foolproof, and I know like you won't lose your money, but every time, like, okay, now I have to click, and then 10 processes need to happen, and I have to wait for the response. And when it's non-disruptive, and you stay on the same page where you have the same screen before you, it's somehow you feel safer. I'm like, okay, cool. I'll click this, and that's it. The button is disabled, it's enabled. I know it's true. I have some feedback, and that's it. And the other thing was, I'm from the generation where you had your native apps, and then you had the web pages, and these two were completely different things. Like, and your mindset was, okay, now I need to browse. So I need to browse. I need to, you know, I know what I'm in for. So back in the day, I also like turned off images on the web page because I would need like minutes for a normal page to render, especially if the programmers were not good enough to know that they need to compress images, you know, and then I would end up with broken pages. You just read the text and that's it. Whereas on the other side, you know, now, okay, I need to type something, I need to, I don't know, do something on the computer. You had one type of experience, and then you jump into the browser, something else. And, you know, it was like always shifting between these two. So this is also something that I think led to more and more people and generally business moving to and realizing like, okay, we need to maybe do it this way. You know, I'm not even sure who started it. My first real great experience with this was with Gmail. So like Gmail changed the way emails were done for me, changed the way I think about the applications, and basically like the whole experience with it was much more pleasant than anything else I used online up to that point. So yeah, so this is like basically the distinction for me.
Yeah, it's a really good analogy. I remember in the 90s, early 90s, you know, like those images progressively loading in, and it was there, you know, and it's an interesting analogy for, you know, monolithic applications and user experience. And there's tons of research on, you know, how quickly things happen and user engagement and increased revenue conversions. And, you know, in monolithic applications, often I see like when payment is handled by a third party, you know, that like URL bounces back and forth, and you end up on a page that looks nothing like your application.
Yeah.
You know, yeah, the user experience is kind of off. You know, it's slow, it's off, it's inefficient on the back end resources side. You know, there are benefits to it, but there are drawbacks. At the same time, there are also challenges with a decoupled approach, right? You know, what are some of the issues that frustrate you from that perspective?
So as with everything, you know, we figure out what's bad with the current approach, and then we're like, oh yeah, we have the answer, let's do this, and then we jump into something else. And then over time, we figure out, oh yeah, maybe this wasn't such a good idea after all, or maybe we should rethink this. So from my experience, because, you know, I now have enough experience in both worlds, like done plenty of work in either way. So I can really say from my personal experience, I always hate the complexity that comes with it. So as I hate the expression full stack developer. I think that every developer should know some basic stuff, and you shouldn't give yourself a title if you know those things. But now your whole knowledge stack needs to be like really wide. So if I want to do a decoupled, maybe I use Angular on the front end, I use Laravel in the back end. So I really need to know Angular, and these are completely different development methodologies. The mindset is completely different. The way you handle things is completely different. So it's not so easy to jump from one to the other, you know. Okay, the syntax is not that different, at least when you get used to it, it's not, but really the way like, with observables, with promises, with everything that you have in TypeScript or JavaScript is totally different to the way you work normally in PHP or in some backend languages. And then this whole thing gets a bit too much, you know. Then of course the companies then have two teams that do this and do that. One team does front end work and they specialize in that. Other team, so you have like really a segregated, really separated type of developers that you need. But then again, for the company, it's a challenge. Okay, we need to find Angular developers and we need to find PHP developers, and it comes at an increased cost. So you have to plan for everything. You need to manage all that. You need to manage the communication, because like every time you have communication between teams, the effort level is up by, I think, 30%. That's like the nominal value that you say when you have communication to an external interface. You have to factor that in when you're estimating, when you're doing the actual work. It will cost more time because you need to build around this fence between those two teams. So for me personally, as someone who does all the work, so both front end and back end, I hated the increased complexity that comes with it, because you manage two repositories. You have to take care of front end code, of back end code. The other thing that comes with this in the front end is that sometimes I ended up with huge libraries, okay, let me use this, I need charts, I need, I don't know, some date plugins, I need Lodash, I need whatever. You end up with libraries that are a couple of MB big. And, I mean, it's fine, we have fast internet, but we need to draw the line somewhere and say like, okay, this is now becoming increasingly inefficient because like the browser needs to load all these things, needs to run all these things. And, like if you check now, I don't know, it wasn't like that. Like if you open your system task manager, and check like memory usage, now Chrome is dominating. It used to be like, I don't know, whatever Netscape Navigator or Explorer or whatever we used to use, it was at the bottom of the list, and now like Chrome is using half of the resources. And this is due to how things are happening now. And this is some of the downsides of it, because it comes with increased complexity and it adds so much work to the browsers themselves.
Yeah, technology for all, advantage more people, but more overhead in managing them, different skill sets, different hires. Hiring's already complex and a challenge. So
it's I had also I have some more points. I'm not done. So I also sometimes it can also be very dangerous. I was doing like cleanup work on one app, which was done in Angular, which had, for example, I mean, the change detection is generally the biggest problem for all the front-end frameworks, because they promise you two-way binding. So basically, if you change something on the page, in the code on the page, like in your framework, React, Vue.js, Angular, whatever, you get to be aware of that change. So this is what they call the two-way binding. Also, if you calculate something, it will be reflected in the browser. The user will see that change. And the way this change is detected is sometimes can be very inefficient. So like Angular, Google changed from Angular 1 to Angular 2. They made a complete change because for this reason, because Angular 1 was so inefficient and was eating up so much of browser resources that they had to like change it from the ground up. But even in Angular 2, if you didn't know what you were doing, like I remember I opened the page, it had 2 million listeners on a single page. So every time you type, like you hit a button on the keyboard, it triggered 2 million like listeners, and it was really terrible. And this is what's really dangerous, because nowadays there are a lot of experts. They are real experts, but then they are experts who like can do something quickly, but don't really understand what's happening in the background. And this is exactly because of this, because you jump in, you don't even know how we got to this point, and you just assume it works, and then you end up with something that's really killing. Like I remember I had a table with 20 rows and it wouldn't render. The browser died sometimes, and it can really be a huge problem. And then this comes again, for it to work properly, you need experts, and you cannot be really an expert at everything. You need to choose your technologies, and then it's increasingly hard to find resources, because good people are I mean, easy for Tag One to talk. We have, I work with some really great people here, but otherwise, like sometimes I had problems, not personally problems, but I've seen people who maybe don't really know what they're doing in that regard, and then that can cause problems if you're not really an expert in this field. So this is something that for me, I wasn't aware of this, I have to say. I was also on the bandwagon, like, yeah, let's do it. I love this. I'm an engineer and I don't care about design and things like that. I just want to implement business logic and focus on that. And then as it started to grow, as I've seen more and more projects, I'm like, okay, maybe we do have a problem here, because this is not the first time this happens. Or another big example for me was, okay, how do we separate what goes where? Like there are some really complicated, I mean, it sounds simple, but not everything is black and white. So it's not always easy to separate, like, okay, what do I need to do in the front end and what do I need to do in the back end? Because with the monolithic, it was easy. You have maybe front end validation, and that's where it stops, and everything else you do on the back end, and then it's clear. So, okay, I'll design it like this. And now it's like, okay, do I need to move this maybe to the front end? How safe is it? I will certainly save resources on the back end, and the server will have less to do, but is it a good idea? And do I need to separate this process? Like, I don't know, if I do some complicated calculations, is it safe to do it in TypeScript, in JavaScript, in the browser? Or is it maybe a better idea to do it in the backend? And then if I do it in the backend, then I need to call an endpoint again. So these sort of things like add up. And again, then it leads to like totally it leads to projects that get canceled. It leads to projects that are in problems because you just don't factor this stuff in. And one of the biggest things that comes from all of this is that projects tend to take a lot longer than if you just jump in and do the work and that's it. Here you have to plan for a lot more things. So this is something that we figured out, in the meantime, while doing all this work, you just somehow you get to be aware of all these all these drawbacks.
Yeah, there layers of abstraction, and these tools are really powerful, and they enable people that otherwise wouldn't be able to create applications to do a tremendous amount of work very quickly. And that's fine for a certain class of applications, right? But when you start getting into the territory of applications that we develop, I think that's where a lot of problems and challenges arise that you mentioned. Being quick and dirty and fast is super short-sighted, and leads to a lot of problems and failures down the line. And you need to have a significantly greater level of expertise and planning and design up front to achieve your short-term and be in a position to do your long-term goals. So is there, there are some significant challenges to both approaches, and we know there will never be a perfect approach because as soon as we have it, we're unhappy with it.
We find something wrong.
Is there some sort of, these are really great approaches that have a lot of benefits. Is there a middle ground between them that starts to settle some of this out?
So I think there's, as with most things, there isn't and there is a right answer. So for me, first thing is you analyze, so what do I need? What do I want to do? Does really my application, what I want to develop, have a real benefit from doing like completely decoupled approaches? Is maybe a monolithic approach enough for me? Because you get what you need, and nowadays it's not really, we have faster internet and everything, so in some cases it might be just enough for what you need. And on the other hand, like if you need something more complicated, if you really have a B2B application, something that people will open and use the whole day on the screen, and you have really the resources to develop it, because you have to be aware that, okay, instead of doing it for 6 months, maybe you'll need 18 months to develop it, but then it will work fine. Then you should definitely consider that way. And in the meantime, we have like a sort of a hybrid approach, which is in the last, I think, a year, really starting to gain steam in the Laravel community, is this kind of hybrid approach where they make life easier as a developer for you to create basically single page applications and even progressive web applications without having to dive into too much front-end code. So basically you don't have to use, some of the approaches use front-end frameworks in JavaScript or TypeScript, and others you can mostly survive like with 95% of writing just PHP and still end up with a great user experience. So this is like the middle ground between those two. It's fairly fresh, fairly new, so it's still not clear. As with everything, we figured out what's wrong with both two old approaches. Still not clear how does this stack up against everything. The early signs are promising. I did I already used both approaches. One of them I used extensively, so I developed work. I even know one of the core developers in one of these libraries, and so far it's really a pleasant experience. I cannot guarantee that it will solve a bunch of problems. I'm not sure where does it stack up on this whole scale of small, middle, and huge projects, and how does it behave once we get to that point. But I think this is a neat way, and this is also a nice toolkit to have in this whole, tug of war between should we do it this way, that way. Now we can do it both ways, basically. So it's nice, and I like it that there's like this third entrant in this game, where as with everything, let's try to take both the best of the both worlds and try to combine them into one, and then see how this behaves.
Awesome. That's a good segue to part three. So let's wrap up here. Appreciate you walking us through some of the challenges with these monolithic applications and fully decoupled systems, and finding that middle ground. If you haven't already, please check out part one, the overview of Laravel. Next up is part three, the future of application development in Laravel, and continuing this conversation. If you like this talk, please remember to upvote, subscribe, and share it out with your friends. You can check out our past talks at tagone.com/tagteamtalks. As always, we would love your feedback and input on this talk or topic suggestions for future talks. You can email us at tagteamtalks@tagoneconsulting.com. Again, Laslo, huge thank you for joining us, and thank you to everybody who tuned in. We'll be back soon.